This is the third in our series of webinar events. So thank you so much for joining us for this evening's event. If that's your time zone, here for me, it's just starting the evening, but I know that it might be a little bit later for many of our participants listening into this event this afternoon. Thank you again for joining us. Of course, you can put your questions into the chat box at any time, and we're going to certainly have some time for questions and answers at the end of our event this evening. Thank you again for joining us, and thanks to Noran and the team for making this happen. Our friends at Mars Research Network. My name's Gareth. I work for Research Square Company, and this is a presentation about planning your publications for high impact journals. So let's get started. Let's get going. This is a little bit of information about me. I'm sure you're getting very tired of seeing this by now, but I'm the author of lots of academic papers. I also work as a reviewer and editor for a journal published by one of the other big publishing companies, Taylor and Francis. So I'm hoping that in this presentation this evening, we'll be able to learn and pass on some information about how to get your work planned for publication in leading international journals. Don't forget, if you have a question, please, we welcome questions. Please just type your question into the chat box. We will be back for a Q&A session at the end of our presentation this evening. So lots of questions, I hope. Lots of once again for joining us. When you're thinking about planning your articles for publication, we are thinking about getting those papers, getting those articles into the best journals possible. And of course, when we start to think about planning our publications, it's going to be very important for us to think initially about our readers. Our readers are the most important people in the whole process of academic publishing. Excuse me, I've jumped forward a little bit there. Your impact, planning for publishing in a high impact journal, depends upon thinking about your readers. And of course, we don't write academic papers so that we can just pin them on the wall and give them to our parents as presents. We write academic papers so that people will read them and people will cite them. That's the key. So let's get inside the minds of the people who are going to be using our academic articles, inside the minds of the people who are going to be citing our papers. Here's some fun facts about your readers. They don't have much spare time to read. Of course, they're busy academics just like you are. They want to read papers as fast as possible. They'll get frustrated if they struggle with understanding, and most articles that they get access to, that they see, will not be essential reading. So one of the key things to think about as an academic writer is making sure that your papers are targeted to your readers. And there's a number of ways that you can do this by applying writing techniques. Have a listen to some of our other webinars, in particular the one that we gave 2 weeks ago on medical writing, for example. Keep your English simple and easy to understand. And most of your readers, of course, will not be native English speakers. That's very important. That's key to keep in mind. Most of your readers will not be native English speakers. Where does most of the academic work that gets published around the world every year come from? It comes from countries where English is not spoken as a native language. So in this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about perceptions of impact so that we can plan our articles for publication in leading international journals. What do editors think makes a paper great? What do authors think, you and I, makes a paper great? And this feeds into what impact and it means messaging your articles to achieve maximum impact. Planning your publications, your articles, your manuscripts, your writing, so that you can get your work into the best, most impactful academic journals possible. That is very, very important. There are millions and millions and millions of academic papers published all of the time. about 2 million or so every year. There's 30,000 papers published every week just in the medical sciences. How can you ensure that your work stands out? And that's one of the keys of this training, is to help you understand the techniques that you can use to ensure that your papers stand out, that your papers are the papers that people are going to want to pick up, download, read, and cite, and also then planning your publication for high impact journals. These are the keys to success, really, as an international researcher, making sure that your work gets into those leading international journals. We all want to be in the top percentiles. We all want that people will download and read our articles. And why publish is also something that's very important to think about when you start to plan your papers, when you start to plan your publication strategy, because different people at different career stages, as you know, will have different motivations to get their work published in international journals. You might be a young researcher and you need to get your work published to get a master's or a PhD degree. You may have an English SCI paper requirement for your degree, for your master's or for your PhD. At later career stages, you might need to get published to get funding. To have a higher chance of getting funding, it's of course important to have published results. Perhaps you need to get published in order to get promoted, to get tenure, for example. Or indeed, some people just like to publish their work in order to develop research and move the field forward. I used to have this friend in Argentina who said to me that that was his motivation for getting his work published, so that when he dies, there's going to be some legacy left behind. There's going to be information left behind that he's generated over the course of his career. So what are your motivations for developing and planning an academic article? Your motivations are very different to the motivations of editors and the motivations of peer reviewers. And it's worth knowing this when you start to write, because of course the editors and the peer reviewers, they are the gatekeepers, if you like, to ensuring that your work gets out in the international journals. So being aware of what drives editors in particular is very important as well, as you start to think about planning your next publication. Perceptions of impact then can be quite different. What's important to authors: my paper gets read, my paper gets downloaded, my paper gets viewed, my paper gets cited, my paper has an impact outside academia, quite different to what journal editors care about. Journal editors, they want to publish articles that are going to get read by other people. Of course they do. They want to drive up the impact factor of their journal. They want to drive up the readership of their academic journal. They want to see that the content that they get cited, they're not so interested, generally speaking, in the impact of the research after it gets published in the journal, whereas of course authors tend to be. So your perceptions of what makes an impactful academic paper quite different to the perceptions of what journal editors tend to think about when they select papers, when they pick up papers that come into their submission systems and decide whether those should be sent out for peer review or not. We put together a handy little field guide here for editors, the kinds of editors that you might encounter in your career, because of course in English we use the word editor to mean a number of different things. Journal managing editors, they're the guys at the top of the tree, the people at the top of the tree providing business perspective. Language editors, people like me who might work on your paper to improve the English. Academic editors, those are the people that we really need to impress when we make our submissions, when we plan our publication strategy. These are the people who are deciding, based on submissions that come in to the journal, what's going to happen next. Will they be sending your next submission, you the author with your head buried in the sand? Will the editor be sending your paper out for peer review? This is what happens when articles get sent into international journals. It's the first step of article submission. We call it editorial triage, just like getting hit by a bus out there on the street. If you get hit by a bus, you get rushed to hospital. The doctors at the hospital decide what's the next stage for you in the treatment. That's the triage process. It's the same thing at international academic journals. Desk editors, academic editors, they think to themselves, does this paper fit with the journal's scope? Does the article have a clear message? Is the article original? Is it important? Is it true? And is it relevant to our readers? That links back to what we talked about at the start of our session this afternoon, thinking about your readers, getting inside the minds of the people who will be citing your paper in the future. It's important to plan your publications then so that you can sell yourself to get through that initial journal editorial stage. High impact factor journals, where we all want to get our work published, of course, they want to maintain high rejection rates. Why do they want to do that? Well, rejection rate is one of the ways that impact factor gets calculated. Actually, 9 out of 10 papers that get sent to Nature and Science get rejected before they get sent out for peer review. So you want to be in that top 10%. You want to be having a party when you get that email back from Nature saying, we've sent your paper out for peer review. How can you do this? How could you plan your publication so that you have the highest possible chance of getting your work sent out for peer review? Well, think about your readers, think about editors, think about the first step of article submission, think about article editorial triage. What do editors want to see? You can take these factors into account when planning your publications. Editors want to see novelty and news value, real world utility for your research, well-designed ethical studies, and a professional report that uses correct English and correct formatting. Of course, we can help you with all of these aspects of your research. If you need to get in touch with us, we welcome that. Please do reach out to me at the end of the webinar if you need help with dealing with any of these kinds of factors. But of course, we'll talk in a minute about impact, what impact factors are, the most important, the most common, the most widely regarded, the most highly regarded, of course, is the journal impact factor, published by Clarivate Analytics. This is how you can calculate it here on the slide in front of you. It's important to keep this in mind. Have a look at Altimetrics, a great tool that gives you real world impact about your article. Altimetrics is a great tool because, of course, it's more than just the impact factor. You can have a look at these little colored wheels. Maybe you've seen one on the papers that you've published yourself. These little colored wheels tell you how many times your paper has been picked up in various different immediate areas: social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, different places, blogs, Wikipedia, things like that. You can get a measure of your impact much more immediately than you can from looking at journal impact factors. Think about what editors want. So, what have we talked about so far? We've talked about planning your publication initially by thinking about your readers. They're the people who are going to use and cite your next article, and thinking about planning your publication by getting inside the head of those pesky editors who make decisions about what happens to papers once papers come into the journal editorial system. It's important then, isn't it, to have a clear message for your readers. So many authors, so many papers that we see in our editing work at Research Square Company. We see lots of papers, great research, fantastic data, but there's no message. There's no clear take-home message. It's difficult to understand what the message, what the article is actually trying to say. Very important. You've all got great data. You're all fantastic researchers. You wouldn't be in the position that you're in if you weren't doing great work, weren't collecting fantastic information. But when you write your papers, when you plan your publications, let's make sure that we have a clear message for our readers. What is your message? What's the single thing that you would like people to learn, to take away, to take home from your article? Because if editors can't work that out, When they read your cover letter, when they read your draft of your paper submitted to their journal, they're going to reject it because they can't figure out what the message is. Convince editors that your study is important. This is key in publication planning. Editors will think, if I'm interested, then my readers will be too. Authors want a number of things from their publications. Of course they do. We surveyed lots of authors. We talk to lots of authors all the time. Authors, researchers, they want speed. They want their papers to come out as fast as possible. Of course they do. They want their papers to come out in journals with decent impact factors. Of course they do. And they also, we'll talk about this again in a minute, a little bit, they want high reach and lots of readers. Readers, that key word for you there again in your publication planning. What do you want with your paper? Think about your motivations for getting your work published. Speed, decent impact factor, and high reach and readership. These are the three key things that authors tend to want with their articles. So there is a clear synergy between our research and our publication plan. Impact factor, reputation, and reach within the field. That's what we've just talked about on the slide before. This feeds into our discussions of open access publishing when we plan our articles for publication, because lots of authors want their papers to be accessible. They want their work to be open access. What does an impact factor mean? We'll talk about it in a minute. But when you target your work to a journal, it's important to ensure that you're sending your papers to peer-reviewed journals. Of course, a journal won't be reputable. It won't have an impact factor if it is not peer-reviewed. Who's on the editorial board? Who's there going to be assessing your paper? Very important steps to take as an author when planning your publication. Everybody puts lots and lots and lots of work into writing up their papers and doing their research projects. But authors, generally speaking, tend not to put all that much thought and effort and energy and time into journal selection. And you should be, because of course, journal selection, energy, research, is the most important steps in publication planning process. Think about your target journal. What journal are you going to be selecting for your paper? What's the journal's impact factor? What's the citation rate? Do the checking. Put the time in to assess journals to make sure that you're selecting a good one for your next paper. So that's the second key thing about planning a publication. In leading international journals, you need to make sure that you're selecting a fantastic journal. As an aside, I wonder if we could just turn off the whiteboard function for this presentation. I can see that somebody is drawing on the slides with little red marks. So maybe we can just switch that off if you're listening to this. Academic impact is very, very important. Second stage of publication planning. What's the first stage? Thinking about your readers and your editor. Second stage, targeting and selecting a journal. Researchers count papers, of course they do. We think about impact factors. We care about R indices, H indices. Institutions count citations and circulation. But does your research circulation actually translate to impact? How many people will actually read your next paper? These are key steps, key things to think about in the process of planning for your next publication. And we encourage you to think about research impact. Of course, that is more than just academic impact. 50% of it is academic impact, sure, but lots of what you do as a researcher has also got to do with your difference in economic and societal terms. Generating impact is very important. As you plan your publications, think about this as well. What will the impact of your work be. And we do also encourage you to talk about your research. Of course, you're doing the right thing by signing up to these kinds of webinars, working with the Mars Research Network to get some training to develop your skills. Talk about your research to ensure maximum impact. Are you on all of the social networking channels that you should be on? Are you on LinkedIn? Are you talking about your work on Facebook, Instagram? I don't know, but building that impact around your research is a key part of your research plan. It is something you should be doing as you begin your research projects, not just after your papers get published at the end of the day. Research impact is part of your publication plan. Talking about your research to ensure impact is something that you should be doing throughout the whole process. And here's a few tricks and tips for assessing impact. Wouldn't it be amazing the next time that you have to do a job interview or talk about your research project? Wouldn't it be great to be able to say how many times your paper's been shared, how many times your paper's been mentioned, clicks, views, downloads, press coverage, and citations? Attention, interest, desire, and action. Fantastic advice for anybody thinking of applying for a grant. For anybody thinking of going for a job interview. When you talk about your research, it's impressive to show your fantastic papers and talk about the journal impact factor, but it's also very, very important to be able to show that your work has immediate impact. Your own kind of altometric wheel. What's the attention that your work is generating? What's the interest that people have in your research? The desire, the action, shares, mentions, clicks, views, downloads, press coverages, and citations. Keep track of the number of times people engage with your research. Another great resource from a fantastic company that I encourage you to check out, Fast Track Impact. I showed you some images from Fast Track Impact a little bit earlier in this presentation. Here's a kind of workflow that you can go through as you think about your research, your publication plan as a journey over time. Inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. Wouldn't it be absolutely fantastic if the next time you have to write a grant application, you have a figure like this in the application, because that will show the people assessing your funding application potentially that you're thinking about impact as a journey from the beginning of the process, collecting the data all the way through to the outputs, the outcomes, and the impacts. Lots of researchers in their planning, in their publication and research planning, just think about journal impact factor. They don't think about all of the other things that they could be looking at in order to help with that process. Journal selection, though, as we discussed, is also very important. What kind of journal are you going to be selecting for your next paper? Traditional or open access? By and large, traditional journals publish content for free, but then they sell that content back to universities and libraries. The content is behind a paywall. We've all published in these journals, but some colleagues can't access our papers, whereas open access journals, on the other hand, publish content for a fee, the article processing charge. This is therefore the cost of publication, which means that your paper is available for all to read. We've all considered these journals. We've all worried about being able to afford that dreaded APC, that dreaded article processing charges. How can I afford to pay? This is the breakdown fundamentally between the two different kinds of journals that we see out there at the moment. There's variations on this, but when you target your work, it's important to think about this as well. Of course, different kinds of open access journals are out there. Gold open access, fully open access, Biomed Central, Public Library of Science, many of the Springer Nature journals, for example, fully open access. You'll be publishing in what's called a gold open access journal. On the other hand, green open access, these are publication outlets where you're able, earlier in the stage of the publishing process, to deposit your articles into a repository at an earlier stage. So have a look at preprint servers as part of your publication plan. The Research Square preprint server, maybe somebody with access to the chat box can just put into the chat box the Research Square preprint server link. That would be fantastic. We are the largest preprint server in the world at the moment. There are, of course, many others out there, but lots and lots and lots of options open to you as a researcher when you think about publishing your work and making sure that your work is accessible to as many other researchers as possible. Try to have a go at using a preprint server. You can put a draft of your work as it goes into the review system online for other researchers, other colleagues to have a look at and get the chance to comment on. So your journal selection as a researcher is very, 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 very important. And lots of authors don't put the effort into this. They do the research into that about an effective target journal. They just publish in the first journal that they think of. They just get an email from a predatory publisher potentially and select that journal, or they use journals that their supervisor or somebody in their university potentially has recommended. We've got a pirate code for journal selection, 3 rules for that. Aim high. Make a list of 5 to 10 journals in your field where you would like to see your research published. Rank them by impact factor. Talk to those pre-submissions talked about in our earlier presentation in this series. You can write to journal editors and ask them, would you be interested in potentially considering this paper for your journal? You can write to as many as you like. You don't get tied down by making pre-submission inquiries. And of course, guideline number 3, training. You can learn to sell and manage your article submissions. Of course, we are here. We're always available to help with that kind of thing. And so in your publication plan, your readers, editors, having a clear message, thinking about your target journal, lots of very successful researchers say to us, I never start to write until I've decided on a target journal. And this is a very good strategy to have. Most researchers do it the other way round. They write the paper up and then they think, where am I going to publish this paper? That's not the best strategy. It's important to think about doing it the other way around. Think about your target journal before you begin the writing process. Why? Because every journal is different. Length, audience, scope, there's full articles, original articles, letters, rapid communications, and you, of course, can self-evaluate as well. So this is key. And talk to others, talk to colleagues, make those pre-submission inquiries as part of your publication plans, and be effective with your writing. Think about your message. I always talk about this when I'm doing presentations. I always think about my grandmother or a bus driver explaining the message of my next paper to somebody who does not know anything about my research. What is the message of my research? How am I going to boil that down, distill that down to a simple message that anybody can understand? It's a very, very good exercise to go through. Anyway, we often ask this question of PhD students, for example, when they're interviewing for PhD positions. Now explain to me what your research is about in simple, easy to understand terms, accessible to anybody. What's your message? That's the key to effective academic writing, really the final stage of publication planning, actually doing the writing itself. So when you begin to write, it's important to prepare to write. Your message, your audience, your journal selection, and your structure are the 3 key things to know about before you begin the writing process. Check the original nature of the results, the story, the take-home message. Is this new and interesting? Because if it's not, journal editors won't be interested in passing it out for peer review. How does your work relate to a currently hot topic? What's new and challenging? Do we provide solutions to difficult problems? Assemble your message into 1 or 2 sentences as the final stage of the publication planning process. It's all in the story. It's very important to do this as you begin and think about being effective as a writer. And here's that famous upside down pyramid hourglass shape for academic article writing. Really, really important as you plan the writing stage of your publication. The introduction. What are you going to say in the introduction? Don't forget that this is broken down usually into 3 key sections. You give a general background. You then talk about the current state of the field and then the problem, the issue in the field that your work aims to address. That's the shape for your introduction as you build your publication plan. Getting from general information, interesting information, eye-catching information into the specifics of your research. If you're working on pollution in the soil, for example, you wouldn't start off talking about the nitty-gritty of the chemical reactions in the soil because nobody's really interested in that apart from a few people in your own field. You start off by talking broadly, talking generally about the implications of this area of research, the general background. Then give the readers information about what's recently been written relevant to this question in the field, then the problem, then the aims, the methodology in sequence, what happened first, second, third, fourth, data collection, followed by data analysis, then your results. Great tip for writing your results when planning your publication is to base them around your figures, your illustrations, figures, text, then summarize your findings and your conclusions, evaluate your findings, and then provide that final solution and key implications at the end of the paper. Finish strong. Everybody wants to finish their papers with the most important, most significant conclusion of the work. Key to publication planning. So readers, editors, thinking about your target journal selection, and then building your message and linking your ideas together as we go through the work. Don't forget those reporting guidelines, the PRISMA guidelines, the CONSORT guidelines, the STROBE guidelines, the a reporting guideline out there for you. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to do everything yourself from the ground up. There will be help out there. And so we do encourage everybody to have a look at the equatornetwork.org, where almost certainly, especially if you're a medical researcher, there's help available, reporting guidelines out there to help you with your article writing. Common mistakes that people make in their papers. We see these all of the time. Topics in the introduction not mentioned later in the text. The introduction lacks theoretical or a conceptual framework. Missing details in the methods. The ethics are not mentioned. The methods don't match the results. Don't forget that the number one reason papers get rejected is because of real or perceived issues in the method. Unexpected or negative data not mentioned, limitations not discussed or mentioned, new results discussed in the discussion that aren't talked about in the results section, conclusions that not supported, their significance, but does that really mean anything in the real world? People often end up making associations in their data and not being able to show causation. Of course, you can plot any variable against any other variable, but are those two things really causative in their relationship? The promise in the title of the paper not delivered in the main text. The abstract might omit key information, and there's information in the abstract that doesn't match what you put into the main text. So have a look at these common mistakes in logic. Time that if you go and listen to other presentations in this series, the upcoming series that we're doing, Research Square Company with the Mars Training Network, we'll dive into lots of these issues and we'll talk a lot more about writing, the nitty-gritty of writing, the publication process, peer review, and post-publication impact, how you can manage that as a researcher. Now, I'll make some final comments, if I may, by referring to one of my own favorite authors of all time, the fantasy fiction author, Terry Pratchett. Maybe you've heard of him, maybe you haven't. Very popular English language fantasy fiction author, somebody from my childhood. Now, Terry, bless him, is no longer with us. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, but he gave us a key tip for writing and publication planning. And that is that people like to be told what they already know. Remember that. They get uncomfortable when you tell them new things. They don't want to hear about things in your papers that are unexpected. What does this mean? It means, of course, that most research is incremental, building on things that people already know. And your publication in an incremental way, building your argument, building your comments, building your text from one step to the next, building on things that people already know. You can ask anybody who's made a major discovery. Often large steps forward are much harder to get published in the academic literature because people often just don't believe that the results are true. So think about this. We take this important writing lesson from good old Terry Pratchett. Research Square Company, just to finish up with this evening. We exist to make research communication faster, fairer, and more useful. We've supported more than 3 million authors. That's right, more than 3 million in more than 190 countries since 2004. You can have a look at our company pages here on the slide. Have a look at our preprint server, the largest preprint server in the world. Lots and lots and lots of research being put there every day. You can use a preprint server to get access to the latest research and comment on emerging science. Have a look at the link on the slide here as well. We have a fantastic, a Fandabby-Dozy digital editing service that you can also have a look at on the link here on the slide. It really is absolutely amazing. You go to the link, you sign up for a free trial, you get a paper edited in less than 10 minutes, less than 10 minutes. And it really is very well edited as well. It's an incredible artificial intelligence algorithm that's been trained on real academic papers in your subject area. So have a look at that as well. It's a fantastic way to speed up your publication process. My name's Gareth Dyke. I'm very happy to provide you all with access to this wonderful Gareth 10% discount code on all of our AJE services. AJE, American Journal Experts, is the other half of Research Square Company, providing English language editing, formatting, figure preparation, translation, grant services, and journal recommendations, amongst many other services. There's my contact information. Please feel free to send me a message or an email at any time. And with that, I will say thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation this evening. I don't know if Naran or any of the other organizers want to jump back on to the presentation and say a few words, but we will now throw it open. Anyone have any questions or comments? Please do put them into the chat box. You're very welcome to do so, and we will hopefully answer them if there are any questions. Naran, anyone? Am I on my own? Okay, no worries. So I don't know if anyone has any questions. Please feel free to put them into the chat box. I'm just scrolling up the chat box. I can see that Naran has posted the Research Square preprint server link. There's links also to the free certificate. Yeah, don't forget to go up the chat box, everybody, and fill in the Google document so that you can get your free certificate for this presentation. We provide certification, of course, and we'll also provide everybody with a link to the recording.